Miscellaneous beings, I am Mick Ivanushek and you are listening to my voice. I am excited to welcome you back after quite some time. I had to issue warranty on my podcast recorder. Lately, I listen to podcasts at increased speed. The speed at which the guests and I talk is probably limited by the rate at which we can formulate thoughts, not your ability to keep up. So, I encourage you to try a higher pace and see if you like it. Today's guest is Christoff Heunis. I hope you enjoyed this episode, for I certainly loved recording it. Hello, Christoff. Welcome. Do I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, good.
Great to be here. Thanks for allowing me my second chance.
No, man. I appreciate you coming here. Really, you're a great guy to talk to, and very interesting. So I thought I'm gonna ask you. You're from South Africa, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And I learned that one of my favorite ways to learn about history and is through the lives and stories of people. So, can you tell me, was your family affected a lot by the revolution apartheid when it was disassembled? Like, how does that affect a regular person living in South Africa at the moment?
It's difficult to say. It happened pretty much when I was about 2 years old. I think it was 1994. And if I ask them about it, I don't think they were affected that much. I mean, it's more on the image of South Africa and the interpretation from outside, how this development started and what led to its the peak, when everyone knew about Nelson Mandela going to the jail and why that happened. No one really cared about. They just cared about the fact that there was some disparity between cultures and between races. So I think it was more the effect that it had globally than what truly South Africans experienced. But then again, it's not my area of expertise. So I'm merely thinking, if I were in that situation, how would that really have affected me, other than the indirect influence that the economy maybe has on these high scale decisions.
I see. Okay, so you left South Africa for your bachelor, or was it later?
No. Actually, it was much later. I studied in South Africa at the University of Stellenbosch. Started with mechatronic engineering for my graduate, and then moved over to biomedical engineering, which at that point, at the stage when I started with my master's, there was not really a detailed outline of what constitutes a biomedical engineering degree. So officially on my certificate, I graduated as a mechatronic engineer in my master's.
Okay.
But what I studied and how I was trained and coached by my supervisors was mainly for biomedical engineering.
So that's like the official Southern African degree for biomedical engineering did not exist yet.
Yeah, it was not official. Even the I don't even know how they ended up deciding, okay, now we have enough interest to formally create this division wherein students can say, I'm a graduated biomedical engineer, or I'm a master graduate in biomedical engineering. So I also didn't really fully grasp, what exactly are our choices. I was just told, listen, there's this small room inside the mechanical engineering department, and it's called BERG, so Biomedical Engineering Research Group. And if you study there, and if you do your thesis on the work provided by the supervisors in that room, then you're essentially becoming a biomedical engineer. Even the definition was like really loosely coined. So if you explain to your friends or your family members, it was a bit hard to grasp really what it really means, which I think is funny in hindsight.
But now you later came to the Netherlands. So
Yeah. So that's where I really became interested in what I learned initially. Essentially designing technologies meant for industry, but now you can apply it in healthcare. So for me, that was what grasped my interest. I understood, okay, if you can build a device that in some way provides a benefit to the end user, that's simple. But if you can build a device that could lead to the improvement of human lives, well, that's a totally different story, right?
I see. So the fact that medical devices are used to save lives and improve health makes your work feel more fulfilling.
For sure, it doesn't even feel fulfilling. It is fulfilling. it is what drives me. It is what made me decide that I want to explore this line of work more. I was actually initially more into rehabilitation engineering, and in
What
this,
is that?
It's a field in which you design, you design mechatronic systems that are either used for training patients who have had, for example, a stroke or struggle to breathe, any form of rehabilitation that regards the use of muscles or the lungs or your heart, is sort of focused around rehabilitation engineering. And perhaps there are other divisions which I'm not even competent with, but it's really a vast area.
Okay.
And the goal is to design a system such that it can be used by, let's say, therapists, that they can use this to train their patients during a conventional therapy.
I see, but you did not decide to pursue the therapeutic engineering.
I started with so my project revolved around the master's project revolved around designing a system that treats stroke patients that are paralyzed on one half of the body. So it's called the middle cerebral arterial stroke, and basically what that does is it causes paralysis. And to train, these patients have to constantly receive some type of sensory input on the half that is paralyzed. So, for example, they can't move their right arm, so they need someone to either take their arm and force them to undergo these motions while providing some kind of input. So either through vibration or heat or whatever active element you choose, as long as there is some kind of input received on the skin or on the arm.
That concerns physical damage in part of the brain?
Yeah, it's essentially a blood clot that becomes lodged in the capillaries or in the arteries in the brain.
And thanks to the stimulation, that region gets bypassed by the neural network?
Yeah, so that region is treated first. So they remove this clot through some minimally invasive technique or through the use of drugs to dissolve it. And once that problem is solved, it's only the first half of tackling the actual challenge. And the biggest part is to recover from that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is then usually through some form of assistance, either manually between a patient and a therapist, or with the use of some kind of robotic system. And when I say robotic system, I merely imply some mechanical system that can either be worn or some kind of exoskeleton, like what some of our department members develop in our labs. But in my case, it was a device that I had to build from scratch, which provided sensory input and visual input to the patient. So, for example, if they have to move their arm in a specific direction, then they receive the vibration on their arm. And I coupled this with EEG sensors that they wore on their head. And these EEG sensors is essentially they sense the brain activity. So if there's a certain area that lights up in the brain, it provides to these sensors a peak in the voltage. And then when you measure that peak, you can understand more or less when there, like it's called epochs, in a certain time when there is a spike. And what I did was then to measure those spikes, assuming that the intent is there for the patient to move their arm. And this assumption was based on training. So you tell the patient, move your arm to the right. Then you measure their brain activity while they're trying to do that. So then you train the system to understand that when that signal is received again, the intention is there to move the arm to the right. And it's essentially...
And it would mechanically move their hand while they were intending to do so? No?
Not mechanically, but it would provide sensory input on that part of the arm. So it was a range of small motors that vibrated. And the reason that's important is because your brain sends a signal to your arm if you need to move it. But in addition to that, the arm sends the signal back. So it is a two-way
like
street.
Where it is, right?
Yeah. So for example, if any motion that you want to do, any muscle that you want to use, there has to be that two-way communication. Otherwise, you have no means of moving at all. And so.
Well, I think it's more about the feedback of even when with your eyes closed, you know very well how your limbs are positioned, right?
Yeah,
and
because
it's necessary for you to do anything.
Yeah, because the neurons that are sent down this pathway, they activate that particular muscle fiber without you even having to know that. But in the case of stroke patients, or some of them at least with this particular stroke, they can send those neurons down, but they cannot receive them again, because that's where the whole paralysis come in. And that was the intent with these motors that vibrate on the arm, so that these motors act as a response to that signal going down and sending a signal back, because they can still feel touch. They can still feel if you touch them.
Oh, okay. So this is for some specific kind of stroke patient.
Because it's for those that have a paralysis.
I see, but it could perhaps also be the case that they can move but they can't feel? Or does that make no sense?
No, that's not the case. It's always if they have a paralysis on one side of the body, then that is indeed what happens. It's not that they cannot feel. Then there's probably some other problem with nerves or something. Okay. But as far as my understanding goes, it is always the case that they can feel, but they cannot necessarily move as a healthy human being would be able to do. So the idea there was to work on a principle called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity implies that when you have new neural pathways that are being trained over and over and over again, then you can actually create new ways for these neurons to move, not through that broken street, say, if you consider now this to
bypass
be
it,
but by a new pathway. So it's the same type of effect you see when babies have to start learning to walk. They first start moving on their stomach without knowing that they're able to use their hands or their legs. Then they start crawling, and with crawling they start sitting up, and then they start using their feet. And so that is because these neural pathways that you eventually use to move around have to be trained in that order for you to eventually be able to. You can't just stand up and walk because those pathways don't exist. So it's like this little branched version of how your brain communicates with your with the rest of your body.
So the idea for this, did you get it yourself or did you get an advice from an advisor? How did you come up with that idea? How do you approach that problem of... I talk to a lot of people who kind of struggle with picking their thesis topic, so they just kind of pick something and then
I've seen that happen as well. No, it's purely by first investigating what the problem is. And it sounds so simple, But I think many researchers forget that should be step one. Like that should be fundamental before you do any project. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with regards to biomedical engineering or medical technology. It can be for any project you undertake where you want to invent something or come up with a new idea. Especially when you want to look towards commercialization. It's imperative to understand that if you are merely trying to be creative and you come up with an amazing, novel, complex design or device or technology, that's all great. And for sure you have learned a lot in the process. And in the process, you are now an expert in, I don't know, programming or designing something or prototyping a device. But if that's not being used eventually, what is the point?
Yeah. So
if no one is utilizing it, then who are you helping but yourself?
Yeah, I understand what you mean. So first start with a problem that you can solve and then think about a topic or whatever it is you're doing.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I did start directly with that. So, wow, it was so long ago, actually. Let me think a bit. So we always are, we had to propose different projects, right? And you can come up with either your own entirely from scratch, or you can select predefined projects which the supervisors usually then provide. And in some way, I think it's also similar in how they approach it here. However, I think it's the vast majority of research projects that are either via governmental subsidies or grants, they all come as a result of one big project, right? So it's already sort of predefined what you should work on when you come here. Whereas in that particular case,
now you're talking about PhDs, right?
Yeah, I talk about PhD, master assignments. Every assignment essentially here at the university, there are these two options. But from my experience, it's been more that you are just given an assignment.
Okay.
Here's your assignment. Is it interesting you? Yes, no. Okay, let's continue. Have you experienced this before where, I mean, you're a student. I've not studied here. So as a student here, your thesis, for example.
I am a first-year bachelor student. So as far as theses go, I haven't actually done any here. I've done a thesis at high school.
Well, then you have still a very exciting journey ahead of you. If you plan on pursuing this type of academic career.
I would like to get a PhD.
I can definitely recommend it.
Your PhD?
Yeah, I received my my degree in April last year.
Okay. What does it feel like?
I would lie if I say that it was the best time of my life.
Doing your PhD?
Yeah, it is challenging.
Yeah, but I like challenge. I really enjoy
for sure.
challenge.
Who doesn't like challenges? However, I found myself often having to sit down and sort of take a step back and look more in an abstract level at what I'm currently doing and why I'm doing it. And always in those moments, I had reminded myself what the reason was that I came here in the first place.
And that is to help people.
Yeah, well, that sounds a bit cliche. Huh? You can always say, yeah, I want to help people, but do you really have that? Is that what really drives you? And do you really want to see that follow through? In my particular case, before even starting with my PhD here, and before even realizing that there is a University of Twente in the first place, I had this. It's like this core memory that I will never forget. It was in 2014, and I was just about to finish my bachelor degree. And as a student at that point, you think that you are ready for the world and you know everything, but really you don't. And the thing was, I thought to myself, who needs a master's? I am ready for, a challenge. Let's go to industry. Let's go try it out. Because that's what most of my friends were doing. That's what most of the students at that time were doing. And I got a call from my best friend from high school, and he told me, and we've known each other since we were, 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So went through all the schools together. We just and he told me that his mother had just gotten a stroke, and to me it was so knowing that this was almost like a second family to me.
Mm-hmm.
You've spent so much time with them. You've seen them through all the phases of developing a family together. Huh? So it's not just superficial. It is really, you've seen both sides of these families. And it was just a shock to me. It for the first few seconds, I didn't really fully grasp what he was telling me. And he essentially said, listen, we have to, like, him and his dad, they have to go to the hospital because this is now the last few minutes, and they have to essentially go say goodbye. And man, I'm getting and I just said, okay, well, keep me updated. Tell me what's happening. Just whenever you have time, let's chat about it. And I don't know, it was a few hours or so, and then we went on with our rest of our classes. And I think the next day he said that they have to get some kind of expert in neurology. And at that time I had no idea even what that entails. That was not even my expertise. I was just some wet behind the ears mechatronics student, right? So I said, okay, what does that mean? What's happening? And essentially it boils down to the fact that there were, I think, and I need to think about this again, but he said essentially there's only, I think, 3 individuals in the entire country, if not in the entire continent, that they tried to reach out to, and eventually narrowed it down to 3 individuals that could help his mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they had to even fly one of these surgeons in who said, okay, I'm available now. There was this massive gap between the private and public hospitals who both they just couldn't help her. They don't have that, they don't have those skilled surgeons even existing, so
that was happening in South Africa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was back in South Africa. And then I was just astonished by what he told me. Because in my limited frame of reference, I thought, okay, well, if you get a stroke, you would be able to be treated at the hospital. And for sure, this was a peculiar kind of stroke. I'm not even sure what type it was exactly. But that's sort of stuck to me, that knowledge of this could happen to my family. This could happen to me. This could happen to anyone I know. And if the one factor that influences whether they might die or not is purely this one small thing, whether there's a surgeon that's skilled or not, that is by chance in that hospital, or if there's someone that at least can use some kind of technology, and at that point I didn't know what existed for treating these strokes or for catheterizations. I didn't even know anything about them.
What is that word?
It's essentially when you insert a catheter into the body to treat some kind of disease. So catheterization.
Catheter is a wire?
Yeah, it's like catheter is more a flexible tube with
Okay.
some kind of function to it, either to place a stent or to diagnose with a camera. It depends. It's really intervention specific.
And now that is related to your PhD thesis.
Yeah. So consequently, that's eventually what I was focusing on. But what was important at that point is that I told him, listen, I will make sure. I don't know why I said it. It sounds so weird. I said, I will make sure. I was like, who am I to say that even? Huh? I will make sure that I will make sure that we will develop something that would ensure that your mother can be treated. But even in my frame of mind there, I was just saying it without understanding what that implied. But I was so shocked that this is what I told him.
It had to be done.
It had to be done, but it also I think it also made me. I was really frustrated at that point. You know, it to me it felt that this is just another thing that we lack in developing countries, and not specifically in South Africa. I just felt that there must be something that is better than that's the current situation.
Yeah.
And so I just made my decision. I started first with that project in my master's thesis, so purely looking at MCA stroke patients and merely working on a system that can help them recover. Of course, I could have focused on working on something that could avoid the stroke altogether, but that's really a lifestyle decision.
Mm-hmm.
That's really everyone needing to exercise and to eat healthy, and that was not my expertise.
Okay. What
Uh,
a creational myth, man.
Eh?
You have a great creational myth.
Thanks. No, so that's what I mean with saying, okay, you have to focus on exactly the problem, and knowing how it works, knowing that you train and you are being rehabilitated by these two pathways that have to work together. I said, okay, well, why not just investigate what the brain wants to do, even if the patient is not aware of it?
Mm-hmm.
And so we ordered these. It was one of the first. I think it was still a Kickstarter project at that time. It was a EEG headset from Emotive. It was called Emotive Insight.
Okay, you bought an important piece of your master's thesis on Kickstarter.
Yeah. So we were one of their first supporters. No, it was one of the first EEG headsets that only contained, I think, 7 electrodes, and normally it's 20 or more, because these electrodes have to be spaced around, equally spaced around your head, to ensure that it covers all areas in the brain. But what they later learned is that there is no real part of the brain that corresponds to speech or your visual input that you get, or touch or feel, any of the senses, and what you want to how your brain functions is not 100% per compartment, let's say.
Yeah, like the brain is not 100% what's the word? Compartmentalized.
Yeah, exactly.
But from what I understood, especially during World War II, because bullets were harder and sterilization was a thing, you had a lot of people who had like holes in certain parts of their brain.
Yeah.
And certain things would just stop working. So that's how these functions get kind of assigned to
So and also through, perhaps, I don't even know, maybe there were these crazy scientists that did experiments on humans back then, but they most likely figured this out through trial and error. Say, let's take this part out and see what happens, which is, of course, disgusting and frowned upon.
Okay, anyway, your
we are digressing now.
Master thesis, you ordered this thing online.
Yeah, so even this was for me. This started to become really exciting.
Not Kickstarter, man. Like, a lot of things don't deliver on Kickstarter, even like things that are pretty easy to deliver.
For sure, and it was a gamble, for sure. But I understood from what we have researched up until that point is that this is really going to work, because it added up to our first of all to the specification that we put out for ourselves for the device. We needed something that's around the motor cortex or around the prefrontal cortex. And
so you collaborated with other people on this device?
I collaborated with clinicians, so surgeons that handle these types of interventions for stroke patients, and also for with physical therapists. So I had the opportunity, because my supervisor is a surgeon himself at it's called the Tygerberg Hospital, and the Cape Gate Mediclinic. And
what kind of input does a surgeon give you for this device? I completely understand the therapists, but the surgeons?
So you understand what feedback the therapist could give?
Yeah,
because they train the patients, right? The surgeons, in this particular case, he had all the knowledge necessary behind the physiology of the human body and how the brain functions.
Oh, I see. So the medical knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. And also he had, his name is Professor Pieter Fourie. He was one of the best supervisors I've ever had. He essentially had already established a line of business activities where he himself valorizes technology that is mainly medical technology, and that originated from the University of Stellenbosch. And so he could easily look at the proposed solution and say, oh, that will work or not. Because he just had years and years of experience with building such devices. So from the technical perspective, that was extremely helpful. But more from the clinical side, how do you design a device that's compatible? I'm not talking about biocompatibility. I'm not just merely compatible or feasible for use with a human. And that was also his assistance where that came from.
Okay, I get it. So on your master's thesis, you don't get that much time, right? That's like probably under a year that you.
No. We got 2 years.
2 years. You spent the whole master's just working on the thesis.
No, it's a bit different back home where how this works. So first of all, I had to apply for a scholarship to be able to do the master's thesis.
Private education in South Africa?
What do you mean?
Like here the universities are publicly funded and it's not expensive to study.
No. It's just public funds as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it was called the National Research Foundation.
So what kind of a scholarship for your life expenses, or because the tuition is paid for by the government, right? So no.
What?
No, that's what I meant by publicly funded.
No. Sorry, I'm laughing, but it's just so funny the sort of expectations that.
No, you don't understand.
That people sometimes have. No, I totally understand what you. We have to fund our own scholarship.
Tuition. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for sure, my I mean, I'm entirely grateful for my parents in that case, because without them, I would not have had an education. But there was a point where I had this opportunity. I wanted to pursue it, but I knew it would be extremely costly. So I had to apply for a scholarship. And that gave me the opportunity to present my own project. And that's where I said, okay, I want to design this device. It's meant for this treatment. What do you think? Submitted it. They said, we think it's a good idea. Here you go.
And who gave you the scholarship?
The National Research Foundation. It's it's a foundation based in the entire South Africa. So hundreds of applicants. They present their ideas for master's assignments or for internships, and then they there's a certain selection criteria, and they let you know that you receive it.
So that is kind of government paying your tuition, right? To the
Yes.
select few. What is
Yes.
the percentage of applicants that are approved for such a scholarship?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Honestly, in that time, I didn't even know that it existed. I'm telling you, I was not as focused on academia as I was in the past few years. I merely wanted to follow that dream of building devices and applying them to healthcare without really thinking about the politics behind, how are my funds being paid and how many other have these opportunities. I just fully believe that if this is what I wanted and I present a good enough idea, that it will be funded, and that's what happened.
Yeah, I see. So you eventually developed it. Was it successfully deployed, or?
Yeah, so we received ethical approval to directly use this system on patients, or the system, let's say, a device. And this is, there are several stepping stones into what shaped my perspective around innovation behind medical technology and also applying it in healthcare. So often, I think, us as engineers or researchers, when we come up with an idea and we start building it, we put so much effort into it, right? And it's an exciting journey to come up with something, to fabricate it, to manufacture it, to test it out, evaluate. Now is the day when you will test it for the purpose that you started it. And perhaps it's easy to then become blindsided as to how will you actually use it on someone? How can you tell that person, hey, this is the intent, this is what we would like to measure, and perhaps it works or not. So I didn't think about those questions until the second before I wanted to use it on the first patient. So the day of
while walking into that
while
room.
sitting in, I'm telling you, I was sitting inside the hospital. I was wearing my best suit and tie that I could find lying in the back of my wardrobe. And I arrived at the hospital, and my supervisor was there as well. He said, yeah, you can proceed into waiting room F, and your first patient is Mr. So-and-so. And he, the selection, the inclusion criteria for our patients were that they had to receive the stroke within 48 hours. They had to have arrived at the hospital, and we need to use the device within 48 hours because that is what we researched to be the time when the effect of this the neuroplasticity effect is most likely to work.
Okay.
So basically, the sooner you start, the better, right? And so his family members, I think it was his wife, she has signed the document, basically approving that we use it. And I sat in front of him. I had everything out, my laptop open, connected, all the communication was perfect, the device worked. I just had to strap it on his arm and put the headset on his head and start the measurements. And so I looked at him, and you could see that he looked entirely miserable. He was partly sleeping, half awake, and you could just see from his expression that this probably is the worst he ever felt in his life. And that shocked me a little, but I quickly overcame it and said, good day, Mr. So-and-so, and I'm Christoff Heunis. I am from Biomedical Engineering Research Group in the University of Stellenbosch. And he's like, yeah, what do you want? And I retaliated a bit. I said, okay, well, so I'm here to help you. And he basically just said, F off. I don't need your help.
Okay. That's discouraging.
And yeah, for sure, man. I was very shocked. I did not expect it. And then come to think of it, I should have expected it because I never started with what was the most important step there, which is to put myself first in their shoes. to have that empathy.
Yeah, but that's very hard to imagine what it's like in such a state.
Oh,
right?
for sure. It's yeah. No, I totally agree. It does not ever take away the sense of disappointment in knowing how much energy and hours of sitting until 3 a.m. and trying out this program and trying to learn more how to use this controller, which one to choose, testing everything, validating everything, and coming to that point where you're now ready to test it out on the first patient. And then they say, I don't want you here. And that to me was really shocking. I went back home without any data.
So you didn't test it on him?
No.
Okay.
And I knew I had to change the strategy.
Your pitch.
I had to bring in a pivot point. No, it was a wake up call indeed, and I later managed to change the way in which we approached him. Don't just barge in and tell them who you are, but talk to them first. Sit and understand how they feel, and for sure, do not be too pressing because you're a stranger. Why would they confide in you? They want to sit there with their family. They want to, they just want to have some rest, man. So eventually, we did have the opportunity to test it on a few patients. However, for my control group, I used healthy subjects. And there I could really see the difference after analyzing the data of the brain activity between these two groups. But for sure...
So you were comparing the brain activity of the stroke patients
yes.
with the brain activity with healthy patient while using the device, and you found that the device works?
Yeah, so what does it mean if the device works? What I did found was that we programmed this device to respond as a result of receiving a signal from the brain, and that response time it's usually called the P200 or the P300 impulses. So it sends within 200 and 300 milliseconds. Signal back to the brain, and for me to measure that activity, I had to understand the difference between those that receive a stroke and those that are healthy, because that could help us then plan accordingly as to when the stroke patient is actually trying to move their arm or not. So that could help us at least validate that the system as a whole worked. But whether that system worked in terms of recovery rate, so if patients recovered faster or not, we had yet to investigate. And by that time, the 2 years were over. And then of course, to answer your original question, the first year of our masters, we spent time with courses. So there are several courses that you can choose that should all revolve around you learning a bit more about your topic. For example, I ran a physiology course, Biomedical Engineering, some linear algebra, advanced control systems, numerical methods, all that are circled around planning and programming something that could be used for within a medical or a healthcare sense. And then the second year, you then spend on applying what you've learned in that research project. So then you have no courses to run. You just have your thesis, and you write an article to substantiate your work.
So you published an article?
I tried to. I was at that point, it was around November, and we usually graduate around December. And in January, I already left for the Netherlands.
Okay.
So I had 2 months, more or less, to wrap up an article, which at that point for me was not doable, as it was my first article. So I really had no prior experience to sending to journals and receiving reviews. I did send it to a journal, but unfortunately I had to change so much I had to essentially be back at the office sitting with the device, and I just didn't have that time anymore.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Is it open source?
Yeah.
So it's possible for someone to get inspired by your work and.
Oh, for sure. I've actually published this at that time on my ResearchGate, and everything is there. The thesis itself, the script to use. I think even if I can check quickly,
I can put a link for it to the description.
Oh, okay, for sure. Because I think it was this particular script that I uploaded was how to connect this emotive insight to this controller. So how do you analyze the input signals? How do you visualize what brain activity is being used? How do you connect it with MATLAB? And I think that was one of my most read, let's say, publications. That was not really yet. It was not even a publication. It was just something I uploaded. It was a method, and I think it's like thousands and thousands of downloads and reads, and
people who were trying to use the tools you have built to communicate with the device. That's
exactly. And what was even more interesting is that I didn't have to necessarily publish that for them to use it.
Well, you did publish it.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying. I didn't have to publish it in a peer review journal paper.
Yeah. Well, it's
and I mean that I think is a conversation is a discussion, a totally different discussion altogether. Is how one and it does make sense because the to substantiate what you work on, and the whole point of peer reviews is to basically confirm from others that are experts in the field whether what you have done can constitute a valuable report in science.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, that doesn't necessarily mean that work that is not published is not useful.
Of course, no.
I've received, I think it was somewhere in France. I got an email from a PhD student, and at that time I was already here in the Netherlands, and she used that method for using the same headset, and she had to analyze whether people that have had a stroke could read and speak well, and how that brain activity corresponds for separate band waves, or like the alpha beta range, which frequencies are activated when they try to speak or read. And we were almost collaborating in a sense, that we would have a meeting, and then I would explain to her exactly how it works and how it was utilized, and she could then easily and for free use that information to do her research.
Yeah, it's you're doing something useful when other people reach out to you and ask you for advice like that.
Yeah.
But still, what does it feel like to spend so much time on like developing this and then just like so suddenly put it aside, like sort of in a box, and leave for the Netherlands, start doing something else altogether?
Well, it wasn't exactly how that chapter ended.
No? Okay.
First of all, the device itself, I gave it back to my supervisor to say, listen, here it is. It's anyways the intellectual property of the university, so I can't do anything more with it. And even if I wanted to, at that point, that was around the end of my master's thesis, and that's when the original story came up with my friend and his mother. And at that point, I knew that if I want to explore this further, I have to look a bit broader. I have to go to essentially where these technologies are so far developed that I can reap the benefits of an advanced stage of development in another country that I otherwise would have had to wait for a few years in South Africa to reach that stage where I can really investigate it.
So in the Netherlands, medicine is highly developed and ahead of Southern African.
Yeah, for sure. At least at that time. Now we are getting up to scratch again. We recently there's recently they have this ecosystem that's pretty similar to our Kennispark here in Enschede. It's a new department that they developed, which is a biomedical engineering department, and it's dedicated to helping students that want to develop their technical medicine trajectories, similar to what we have here, and focuses purely on applying technology in healthcare. And I think that's amazing. They should have done that.
That's great.
They should have done that decades ago. Of course, it's easy to just say it, but it was great to see that this is now this is what the government spends their money on.
All right, your PhD here. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So essentially, after deciding, I just made a decision. I said, I want to just try and develop whatever I've learned here. I don't know how to compare this against what goes on in Europe or America or wherever. I had no baseline to say whether what I want to do or not would actually be successful. I actually was really I actually didn't believe that it would have been possible for me to even get accepted for a PhD.
Why? Your master's thesis sounds great. Why would you doubt your ability to do something like that?
I don't know. It's a strange thing to think about, but I really fully doubted that. I actually thought to myself, okay, perhaps they will say, let's have an interview, and then they would realize, okay, but you had to build your own device. You couldn't even use a supercomputer to do your calculations for you. You had to do so. I think I doubted it because of what I thought it meant to be innovative.
So like you had an imposter syndrome.
Oh, perhaps that is the right definition. I think so, yeah. And it essentially meant that with that doubt, I thought that it was I'm not smart enough to go out there and explain. And of course, in hindsight, if I can go back now to my 23-year-old self, I will just hit me over the head and say, just wake up and just try it out. Nothing keeps you from exploring. And in fact, that's perhaps a little part of me knew, okay, but there might be a chance. Because eventually I applied for, I think, about 66 different universities.
Holy shit, that is a lot. I was about to ask you, how did you pick the Netherlands? But it sounds more like the Netherlands picked you.
I essentially... So I narrowed...
How many did you get into?
I narrowed my search to neurosciences and robotics in healthcare. These two topics were for me quite interesting at that point. And I knew then, okay, that there are only so many departments around the world that that have these sort of target areas. One of them was in the Netherlands. There were quite a few. There were more in the Netherlands that I applied for. I think. Yeah, I should go look back again to all of these application forms that I wrote. Many universities in Europe, I think about 90% of them came from Europe. So just everywhere, Switzerland, Germany.
Why Europe? Was it because you wanted to go to Europe, or because there's good facilities here?
It's for sure the facilities, and I compare it against what I was used to. So I think at that point, anything was, had better facilities than our...
South Africa? I've always thought of South Africa like a very developed country.
Yes, we are developed, but it's not about being developed or not. It's about having the funds to obtain facilities to conduct this research.
So the government spending on education is too low and research.
I think it is. They spend what they are able to spend. I think they have far bigger problems to first try and solve than going towards research.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps this is just conflicting to what is currently happening. But at that point, in my understanding, and at that point, not having any expertise on what the government does anyways, I just thought, okay, let's try it out. I did, of course, apply everywhere in South Africa too. I applied in Cape Town, Joburg. There was this startup even that I sent my CV to, and then later on realized that they just used their seed A round to party for years on end and not, really give any return to investors because they just went bankrupt. Anyways, and I sent these applications out to purely those departments in Europe and even in around Scandinavia. I mean, needless to say, the majority didn't reply. Some considered my background in mechatronics too far away from what they wanted to focus on. They needed more a biology-oriented student.
And it's like if you get a one-on-one with a person and explain it to them, they would realize that you did actually study biomedical engineering. But since these CVs are read by like some HR people, or maybe sometimes even robots, they just like scan through it. Biometrics engineer.
Yeah, and I think also that the opportunities for growth in terms of where you decide to do internships and where you work during holidays here in Europe, I think that's really useful. I've seen hundreds of applications and CVs where it's clear that with the expertise gained by doing part-time jobs or internships at companies or in industry, that really helps you with the know-how on, first of all, how people interact in research groups. It doesn't necessarily have to be in industry, but in groups during, let's say, in groups that have to link together their expertise to work on a project. Or just merely how to work with your deadlines, how to work with time management. These opportunities were not as much for me back then. So I had done, say, a part-time job for perhaps a month, working at civil engineering. It was just not at all revolving around what my expertise should have been. And I think for industries here and these HR representatives, when they look at the CV, they immediately can spot that and say, okay, well, he doesn't have any experience. Yes, he has a degree, but what is his experience? So I think that's why most of these applications just didn't follow through. But for sure, the top three of those that provided positive feedback was eventually from Düsseldorf. There's a research institute. I think it's some type of primate center where they work with monkeys and measuring their brain activity and try to see how that can be used for helping stroke patients, which was a good follow-up from where I started. And the second was, of course, University of Twente. And the third was at KTH in Stockholm. And I had the interview for all of them. Here in the University of Twente was Professor Sartak Misra, who is the principal investigator of the surgical robotics lab. And each of these interviews were totally different. They either was full-on academic, so I have to give a presentation of my thesis and present it in that fashion, similar to what I did at the university. Or it was more on who am I as a person, what are my goals, what are my life goals, where do I see myself in 5 years, those generic questions. And then finally, it was more oriented towards applying technology, but not for healthcare, but more for social interaction. So it was some kind of app or phone thing, and I thought, okay, that's really not where I want to go in.
Yeah.
And so I had two out of the three, Stockholm and Enschede, and then I just compared these two countries, and I said, okay, what is the quality of life between Sweden and the Netherlands? How would you live as a student? How much would you pay for groceries? Every
Yeah.
single expense and everything that would have influenced my life. For some reason, I didn't look at weather really, because I only later found out that the weather in the Netherlands is not necessarily as comforting as in South Africa.
Yeah, but the Stockholm weather also
Yeah,
sucks as.
even less. I've heard a colleague of mine was studying there. But so between
But there's this thing. Name a government that works really well in a place that's warm.
Australia.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, Australia is I would really like to visit, and perhaps even stay there one day. So eventually I compared that, and another thing that drove me to choose the Netherlands was the language and the culture. I mean, essentially, we come from the Netherlands far back, 1652. That's when the Dutchies arrived in Cape Town and settled there.
Why is it? But it's an English colony later, right? Or you speak English in South Africa? No.
No,
Oh,
I speak
okay.
Afrikaans.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
But is there not a lot of English in South Africa?
yes. We have 11 official languages. There's a lot to choose from.
Oh wow. Okay. How many official languages?
11.
11.
Yes,
Holy shit.
I think so. Wait,
That is a whole new paradigm of official languages. Anyway, we're running out of time. Before we conclude, you talked a lot about what inspired you to pursue your academic goals, and
Oh wait, there's at least 35 languages indigenous to South Africa, 10 of which are official languages.
okay, so just 10. Well, in
And
that
then-
case, it's very understandable. If
and
like
then-
11, that would be a lot.
And
but-
then they say again there are 12 official languages. So even that is not entirely clear. We do speak a lot of. I think everyone, more or less, could speak English. For sure. Not everyone can speak Afrikaans.
yeah. In Czech Republic, it's like 30%.
Yeah.
But okay, so what would you advise to people who are searching for passion? Like people are often told to follow their passion.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, I like
Yeah.
gaming,
Yeah.
but I'm not. So I should probably be a Counter-Strike global offensive professional player, But that's not really how life works. And
No. I really want to emphasize that if people say find your passion, then to me it sort of, if you take it literal, what is there to find? It implies that it might happen. You might find it or not. Right? It's not something that you just come across. So finding your passion, it just doesn't make sense to me. What I believe in, and what I've only recently realized, is for you to have something to hold on to that you fully believe in. And they always say, if you wake up, you find something that makes you wake up in the morning, then you want to gladly go to work. No, that doesn't make sense, because it's just unrealistic to expect you to feel like this every single day, every single morning, waking up like sunshine and roses. That's just not possible. But what that passion is, is what you feel is gonna pique your interest every single day. Something that every single day develops more than what you started off with. If you say, for example, you want to be a musician, that is a hobby. It's something nice. It's something that keeps you busy, but is it something that would bring you that fulfillment, both economically speaking or financially? Because, you know,
Not everyone can make music for a living.
yeah, and also what keeps your brain fresh. And if you feel yourself becoming a slave to someone else's preferences or a job's requirements or a company's expectation, and you just feel like you are being a slave that's being like, you know, a puppet with strings, then your first step is to take those strings and to cut them as soon as possible, because then you're not even close to, quote unquote, finding your passion. So the point is to not belong to something or someone, and still find a way to live what you feel is in your head, forcing you to continue. You have to sit down and you have to feel, what I'm gonna do now is really what it's really what will, in hindsight, tell me, okay, you did a good job there, or you did the right decision. It's me looking back, for example, applying for those 66 universities. If I didn't do that, then I was not following my passion. So it's not so much one particular thing. It is just you saying, what is the next thing I would like to investigate, and then doing it.
Great.
It's really, I think, simple.
Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for listening to my voice. You wake up in a dark room. Should you get up? It's impossible to tell. You need to turn around and reach for your phone to check the time. This wakes you up even more. I made an open source app called Horolux, which turns the display of your phone, tablet, or computer into a sort of digital sun. It gradually lights up as the morning approaches. If you wake up at any point of the night, the amount of light in the room will allow you to instantly tell if you're going to keep on sleeping. There's a free web app version. If you're an Android user, you can download it for a symbolic price of $1 from the Google Play Store. Link to everything is in the description.